Well, thank you for welcoming me here today. I have never been to a UU service until today, and so I've been really pleased to get to see and hear and experience all of these things with you. And you've welcomed me here today, though I'm a stranger. And that's exactly what I wanted to think out loud about with you. You know, every major religious tradition admonishes us, teaches us, urges us toward hospitality, toward living hospitably. The ancient Greeks were scared to death that if they did not practice hospitality, that Zeus would hurl down a thunderbolt from heaven and catch the whole place on fire. The Old Testament was concerned that we take care of widows and orphans and the strangers and aliens among us. In the New Testament it says, now be sure to practice hospitality, because guess what? Some people have entertained angels though they didn't even know it. And then there's the Hindu proverb that says, treat your enemy and the stranger as good as God. I think, though, in our culture, it's really easy. It's really easy to reduce the idea of hospitality to just friendliness. Or maybe we think of it only in terms of, private at-home entertaining. And with that, we kind of look at it through the lens of maybe Martha Stewart's magazine or Good Housekeeping. Maybe, though, we relegate the notions of hospitality to the hospitality industry, and we start thinking about the Marriott or the Olive Garden or McDonald's, and as good as all of those things are, people of faith have imaginations. And we want to look down a little bit deeper, and we want to lift up the corners and look behind and look beyond and say, is there more to it than that? And indeed there is. There is more to hospitality than dinner at my place. Living hospitably is a way of being in the world that creates the space for the other to feel at ease, to feel welcome, to have a strong sense of peace and well-being. And it takes us into being more fully human. Now, living hospitably is easy and it's hard. It's simple, it's complex. It's inexpensive, and it's costly, and it changes the world. Now, I always like to say when people start talking about changing the world, what we're talking about is changing our part of the world, aren't we? Well, here's why living hospitably is easy. It's easy because it doesn't always mean doing something really big. Last week I was down at the courthouse, down on Throckmorton, the main courthouse, and we were going through the security checkpoint. There were 4 or 5 of us in line, and the first woman ahead of us threw her purse on the conveyor belt in the little container, and she put her keys in there, and then she walked through the electronic archway, and sure enough, the thing started beeping. So she had to back up because she needed to take her boots off. So I have to show you that her jeans were real slim right here. And so she's bent over and she's trying to, roll up the jeans, and she's on one foot and she's on the other foot, and she finds the zipper to the boots, and it's summertime and it's hot, and there's 4 or 5 of us in line, and we're all standing there watching her, and she's getting nervous, and she's kind of talking under her breath to herself and to us and saying, I know I'm taking up too much time. And suddenly someone said, it's okay. Take your time. And it broke the ice for all of us. It was such a simple thing to do, to speak the language of hospitality so that this woman could feel at ease. So she wriggled out of her boots, she threw them on the conveyor belt, they passed on by, she passed the test, and we all moved right along. I watched her as she sat on the bench, putting her boots back on. And she sat with the woman who had comforted her. And as I looked at them, I felt like I could see this aura of peace and welcome. It was wonderful. You see, the woman who comforted her had gotten into Boot Lady's head and decided that she wouldn't let her suffer alone. Such an easy thing to do. But then here's how living hospitably is hard. It's hard because sometimes living hospitably might mean that I will sacrifice the approval of my friends or family in order to welcome someone else in. Others might not like this idea so much. I have a friend who, along with her partner, they are foster parents to two women who have intellectual disabilities. And I'm pretty sure that almost no one would be unkind to this family if they saw them in public. But when I start thinking about the fact that in our country, though we make plenty of efforts, that opportunities for people with intellectual abilities to get jobs are way too limited. And so we must do the hard work of hospitable living in their behalf. We must challenge the status quo. We must make room for the other in the workforce. There's so many things to do. It's so complex. It'll cost us political advocacy. Who knows what all it will cost us. And so sometimes living hospitably, making space for the other, is pretty hard. Here in Fort Worth, not unlike other cities in the U.S., we wrestle with issues of affordable housing and housing for the homeless. Why do we wrestle? Because of a phenomenon known as "not in my backyard," which is a phrase that describes the resistance that sometimes we have to having housing projects in our area. And yes, there are a lot of legitimate concerns there and problems, but I keep wondering, what if we learned to live more hospitably? What if we went down deeper than just goodwill and wishing things were better? And those are important gateways, the gate that opens us to going down deeper and to learning to make friends with, to create long-term relationships with people who seem to be so different from us, but in fact they are so much like us. What if? What if we lived more hospitably? What if we let the contagion of hospitable living do its work? You know, there is the saying that rising tide raises all boats. And the mixed income housing model really does work in a lot of cities. We've got data on it. But it's hard work, isn't it? I understand that it's hard work. And so sometimes living hospitably is difficult. But living hospitably also makes us healthier and happier. I love the story by Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote it in his book, Outliers, about a group of Italian immigrants who came to the country about 1882 is when they started coming here. 11 of them set sail from a small hometown southeast of Rome. And they first landed in New York, but then they pushed westward and went to Pennsylvania, found jobs there, and began to prosper. So of course they sent word back home. And over a period of about 12 years, what was a steady stream became nearly a flood of Italian immigrants to this particular part of Pennsylvania. They built a little town that they called Roseto, after the village that they had left behind in Italy. Now there was a doctor named Stuart Wolf who taught at the University of Oklahoma Medical School, and he spent his summers on a farm in Pennsylvania, not far from Roseto. One night in the summer of late 1950s, he was giving a speech at the local medical society. Afterwards, one of the local docs said, "Hey, let's go have a beer, let's talk." And as they exchanged stories, the local doctor said, "You know the strangest thing? I treat people from all over the region, but I treat almost no one from Roseto who has heart disease. They just don't seem to have it." Well, Wolf was very surprised because this was the late 1950s. It was years before the cholesterol-lowering drugs that we now have and the aggressive attempts to prevent heart disease. Heart attacks were epidemic in the U.S. at this point, and Wolf was wondering what in the world is different about Roseto. So he decided to investigate. He hired students and colleagues to gather data with him, and so they came to Pennsylvania, and they got death records from Roseto, they reconstructed medical histories, They invited the people of Rosetta to come in and do some testing. They had blood tests and EKGs, and sure enough, no one from Rosetta under 55 had died of a heart attack or showed signs of heart disease. For men over 65, the death rate was roughly half of what it was in the U.S. as a whole. The findings, the testings, the interviews turned up what is true, that the people of Rosetta mostly died of old age. No alcoholism, no suicide, very little crime, no drug abuse. They died of old age. Investigation about diet and exercise showed nothing that would prevent heart disease. In fact, the one ill health issue that was turned up in all of this was that the people were struggling somewhat with obesity because the Rosettans loved their food. But the key was they loved it together. Rosetta was a highly socialized community. They lived together, sometimes generationally in families. They ate together, they sat on front porches together, they organized themselves into all kinds of social and service groups and faith groups. The people in Rosetta made deep connections with each other. Now imagine Dr. Wolf going to, and his team going to medical conventions, reporting on their findings, when others there were, having charts with DNA stuff and physiological progression, and they were talking about what Malcolm Gladwell calls the magical benefits of people stopping to talk to each other on the street. Living hospitably apparently makes us healthier and happier. Well, maybe that's because, finally, living hospitably makes us more fully human, makes us what we were created to be. As you can tell from the bio that Linda read about me, I have a seminary degree. And so in an earlier part of my life, I spent a lot of time poking around in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. So I want to use one point from the Bible to talk about the issue of becoming fully human. It's the very first story in the Bible. It's the one we call the creation story. And there's so many things that are said and believed and disbelieved about that, but I make one observation. There the Creator is pictured as an artist working with the clay. And the Creator makes not one, but two people. I don't find it very useful to think of this text dogmatically as a marriage text. There's quite a number of practical pitfalls with that view, in my opinion. But interestingly, if we notice this, the name given to the first person created is Adam, or Adam. Well, that's not just the given name to the male character there. Adam is the Hebrew word for humankind. And so that one became the source of the other one. And setting gender considerations aside, though not unimportant, just setting them aside, it's as if the story is saying there must be more than one of us for us to be fully human. We are hardwired for this. And so, in the words of that famous theologian, Alanis Morissette, you were meant for me, and I was meant for you. We do become more fully human when we live in ways that pay deep attention to others. We open ourselves to the experience of what they might bring to the table and how they can enrich our lives. And I want you to notice how I'm saying that now. In the early part of my words, I was talking about our call to give, to extend ourselves, to serve, to be there for people. But now I'm saying what is the other half, other side of the coin of living hospitably, and that is that we become receivers. Living hospitably is like a nice dance. If it's done well, pretty soon we don't know who is leading and who is following. We don't know who is giving and who is receiving. Because as we become fully human and share in each other's lives, there's a richness that can kind of take down the barriers that divide us. If we go around always doing the giving, always needing to be the magnanimous ones, know what we're doing is setting up ourselves for certain feelings of superiority. That's how it works. So why not let the younger person, who's less experienced, tell us something we already know? Can't we listen with open ears and eager eyes and take in their story and let them tell us? And maybe if we listen carefully, we might find out we didn't know everything we thought we knew. We don't always have to be the giver. We don't always have to be the one with the upper hand. Why not let someone do something for us that we could easily do for ourselves so that they get the joy of serving? One example I have of that is, this has been such a huge blessing in my life. I go to church at First United Methodist, and on Sunday mornings we host a breakfast for homeless people. And I began a few months ago to suggest to my fellow host that maybe just standing behind the serving lines and handing out the food was sort of putting some limitations up that we might want to push against. Why not sit down and eat with them too? Why not sit at the table with them? Not our own separate tables, but with our homeless friends. Surely this would level the playing field. Well, how that's worked out for me as I've sat at the table with our guests is now, from time to time, someone of the guys will say to me, I'm going to go get some more coffee, Charme. Can I get some for you too? Now that seems like a small thing. All of us sitting here would probably easily do that. But you know what? It's not so easy. If you have always been the one who's the poor, homeless person who comes in and needs to be served. Always the one on the receiving end, because after all, I got nothing to give. We've created that difficulty, though we didn't mean to. And so, when we form community, when we open ourselves to the other, it is easier then for them to share in the joy of giving. And as I was asked that question for the first time, I was tempted to go, oh, no, I'll get my own coffee. After all, I'm the host here. But I didn't do it. I let him go and get it. And I later reflected on that and I thought, why in the world would I want that line between host and server to be so clearly marked out? I don't think the answer was good. There's so much to say about that particular issue, but I'm going to draw it down to a fine point here. Sometimes true human connection gets lost if I always have to be the server. It leaves the other person diminished, and it may subtly say to me or to them, I got it here. I got the upper hand. And we are all diminished for that. Now I know we can't explode the boundaries of our own human capability. We can't all do everything and be everywhere and change everything that's wrong. But I believe that we can knock a few holes in the walls that divide us from others. And we can do it by living hospitably. It's possible for us to break out of our own particularity and as adults in the faith to move beyond random acts of kindness to cutting a new path of opening the way for others to also feel at home and welcome and useful and part of the whole. I'll close here with a little short essay. I meant to include the author's name, but forgive me, I did not. The most important thing that I've learned in traveling to more than 20 countries is the art of being a guest. And I am a particularly fine visitor at the supper table. I've consumed live fish in Inner Mongolia, not quite coagulated blood sausage on the Tibetan plateau, shredded pig's ear in China, grilled lamb fat in Uzbekistan, horse steaks in Kazakhstan, vodka made from fermented mare's milk in Siberia, Vegemite in Australia, goat in Brazil, snails in France. I don't have an iron stomach by any means, but I do have the will to be a virtuous visitor. We are all visitors here, even when we're at home. Our relationship in any place is ultimately limited. We are passing through. Nobody stays forever. How might we act if we consider ourselves guests in the lives of friends and family? Being a good guest is rather simple in principle, but sometimes challenging in practice. One begins by demanding nothing more than the bare elements of life and dignity, which every good host is more than delighted to exceed. The good guest, then, simply allows the other person to be the good host, to share his gifts, to play her music, to tell his stories, to show her places, and to serve his foods. Finally, a guest should cultivate and express genuine gratitude. It need not be effusive or exorbitant, only sincere. We might also think of ourselves as uninvited but not unwelcome guests of the planet. And I think the rules for being a good guest of the world are similar. Ask little, accept what is offered, and give thanks. And now, as we rise in body or spirit, join in the singing of the chosen hymn number 145 as Tranquil Streams.